You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. It's a struggle to keep kids safe from explicit sexual content online. A bipartisan group of state lawmakers are hoping a legislative fix will help. Shauna Sowersby is the state politics reporter at the Seattle Times.
So this bill is pretty basic. It would just require some method of age verification to access adult content online, whether that's a digital identification or a third-party verification using a government-issued ID.
Sites could be fined if they're found to not be in compliance. If the legislation passes, Washington would join 25 states that already require age verification. But there's a lot of debate over what the actual effect of the bill would be. Here's Danny Askini, the executive director of Gender Justice League, during public testimony on the bill in Olympia last month.
Its vague definition of sexually harmful material for minors will sweep up LGBTQ educational resources, sexual health information, peer support forums, information about consent and HIV prevention.
Askini said she herself experienced restrictions from her internet service provider because of a similar law in Virginia.
Our own website at Gender Justice League was blocked by my ISP, and it took quite a bit of effort to get my ISP to unblock our own website here in Washington state.
Many data privacy advocates also object. Robert Zinchak runs a website opposing the legislation.
If you give data to a data broker, they are going to sell it. They are going to breach it. It does not matter what you put in this legislation. That is what is going to happen. I guarantee it.
So far, the bill hasn't made it out of the House Consumer Protection and Business Committee. There's been a lot of pushback, and its chances of passage in this short legislative session seem dim. Meanwhile, the core question remains: what to do about the access kids have to harmful sexual materials on an ever-changing internet. To explore this issue, I spoke with Nicole McNichols, an associate teaching professor at the University of Washington. She teaches a psychology class called The Diversity of Human Sexuality. It is, by the way, the largest and most popular undergraduate course at UW. Dr. McNichols, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Libby. I'm so excited to be here.
So can you walk us through what does the research say about when a kid is exposed to material like this, to pornography? What happens?
Well, there is pretty clear research showing that for children, for minors, there is a real negative impact, right? I mean, if you think about the types of sex that porn is showing minors, it's grossly exaggerated anatomy, sexual response that is really not representative at all of what real bodies and sex look like. And a lot of it is following sort of very heteronormative scripts that are reflecting dysfunctional gender roles, meaning there's a lot of rough sex, a lot of men throwing women around, a lot of sexual choking, and a lot of women pretending to enjoy types of sex that we don't even know if they've consented to and that don't actually represent what most women find pleasurable. Now, the thing is, I don't want my message to be that porn in any context is harmful, right? There is substantive literature showing that when we're looking at adults, that sure, some people can form compulsive habits when they're watching porn. It can certainly be something that detracts from their well-being. But there are actually a lot of people where porn has no negative impact or can even be helpful, right? Specifically when we're looking at people who are queer, women, as well as couples who watch it together, because it can be normalizing. It can, if you're watching types of porn that are, showing the types of sex, for example, if you're a queer person and it's actually demonstrating the types of sex that might be appealing to you and turn you on, but that you don't normally see in heterosexual depictions of sex in the media, it can feel very validating that there are other people out there that also get turned on by the same thing you do. That can be a healthy thing. So I don't want to say that porn is evil and the enemy, but what we're facing here is there's just a couple of things that are really problematic.
There's certainly a range that we're talking about here. We're talking about effects on adults, which, as you note, there can be positives and negatives. This is a choice that adults are making. When we talk about people who are 18 and under, There's also a range that we're talking about here. I mean, there's like small children, and then there's teenagers who are maybe in their first, explorations of their own sexuality. Do we know anything about the effects on people who are, in their teen years, for example? I mean, I think it's like for most people listening, they would say, okay, absolutely not. A small child should not be exposed to this stuff. For a teenager who knows how to use the internet, we know they know how to find it. Do we know like the effects on them and the potential benefits if there is age gating of making that harder to find?
Yes. So it has been found to be correlated with earlier sexual debut, to be having more sex, to be reporting more sexual problems, whether it's sexual dysfunction, erectile disorder, inability to, later on have healthy sexual experiences. I don't want to say that all kids who watch it are going to experience that, but there is zero doubt that porn is harmful for kids to watch. Zero doubt. In other words, my point is that when we look at adults who are over 18, the impact is very mixed in terms of, whether it can be harmful or hurtful. But for a substantive number of people who are under 18, yeah, it can absolutely be detrimental to their well-being, to their ability to have healthy sexual relationships. And even if it's not in that extreme form, it's certainly setting up very performative images of sex that simply aren't teaching them what real bodies look like.
What do you make of this effort to age gate? We talked about the bill in the Washington legislature. It's unclear the future of it for this session. A number of states, mostly controlled by Republicans, have started to require age verification on porn websites for people to be 18 or older. As a professor of human sexuality, what do you make of these efforts? And, do you agree with age minimum laws?
I think porn can be really problematic to kids. And I think these laws are hugely dangerous to what they could also be denying kids of. Because if you look at the language of this bill, right, it's saying defining porn as sexual material harmful to minors, which is a really, really vague way to be describing it. And what they're saying is, so they're taking this language in a manner patently offensive to minors depicts, and they're saying a person's genitals, pubic hair, anus, or female nipple. Okay, so now is this saying that any kind of sex education that's trying to show what real bodies look like is now going to get defined as porn and is going to be illegal to show kids? Because that's really harmful, right? That's denying them really important sex education that they need to have. And that's important for them to be able to form healthy sexual relationships. That they're not allowed to see anything that involves people touching or such body parts. Again, I mean, that kind of language that's so vague. If somebody's, an art piece, what if you're taking an art history class and, showing an image of which there are many of a person touching their body? And then it's defining sexual acts, including intercourse, masturbation, sodomy. I mean, and taken as a whole, like serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors. I mean, there are Republican states that are saying any kind of sex education lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors. Now, we know from the literature that sex education really protects kids against the types of problems that we want to protect them against. And so this is going to sort of have this paradoxical effect where we're not going to just be limiting porn. We're going to be limiting access to information that, when you look at countries that do give this information, like the Netherlands, that has very sex positive, comprehensive, medically accurate sex education, those kids have lower rates of teenage pregnancy, lower STIs. They have more people they have less sexual assault, and they have more women who describe their first sexual debut as being a positive experience. So we know sex education is important And it is really going to be the tool we need to inoculate kids against the very real harmful impact of porn. But we're essentially, with this bill, threatening to create laws that are going to make sex education illegal. And that is a really dangerous thing.
I'm sympathetic of lawmakers basically saying these tech companies have to find a way to keep kids out. And so this is, their option this time around. And like we said, we don't know how this legislation is going to end up. I mean, for you, how do you think a society can keep kids safe from damaging material without preventing them from seeing things like such sex education and, materials that are beneficial to their development? Is there a way to do it?
So I think the answer is just the better and more sex education we can be giving kids so that we're protecting them, right? So if they're seeing what real bodies look like, that they're understanding what real sexual communication looks like, what they understand what a healthy sexual relationship looks like, and where they understand what full enthusiastic sexual consent looks like, that when we can give them the correct scripts, the right images, we're going to be filling, because look, kids, they're ultimately being led by their sense of curiosity. They're being led by, they have questions, which is developmentally normal at this age for them to have. And so I think that a much more effective mechanism is to be, providing correct information so that they're not turning to porn as a place to go answer these understandably burning questions they have about sex. So, I don't know, of course, I wish there was a way that I could guarantee my kids were not getting on Pornhub. Of course, I have 3 kids. I totally understand that. But I just feel right now, my fear with a law like this is that you're going to make it illegal basically for schools to be able to give sex education. And at the same time, yes, you're going to be limiting childhood access to porn, but are you really? Because now they can just, I don't know about anyone else's kids who's listening to this, but mine are definitely more technologically advanced than me. And I would just imagine they'd get around these laws in about 5 seconds. I'm not sure that it's really a realistic path towards limiting the types of material that we want to limit with, and yet it might backfire by preventing schools from giving information, or online sites, right, that give real information around things like LGBTQIA plus issues and identities, and what is masturbation and is it healthy, right? Yes, it is healthy. There just are all these different side effects that I think are going to be repercussions of this that are serious and really should be considered before any of these laws are passed.
And we've heard from opponents of the law that they fear that when young people do try to get around these age gating restrictions where they have to show ID, that it ends up pushing them to areas of the internet with even more extreme content. So that has been something that's come up in hearings and in conversations about the bill. Professor, before we go, I want to pivot to a more general idea of porn regulation in the United States. In 2024, before he became the Office of Management and Budget Director in the White House, but while he was in charge of the Project 2025 policy blueprint, Russ Vought said that age minimum laws in states were, in his words, a back doorway to ban porn nationwide for everybody, not just for young people. What do you make of that effort?
I just think it's not supported by, if you're trying to make a law that is aimed at improving people's well-being, it's not that, because what we know from the research when we look at porn, again, from the perspective of adults who are watching it, there's a lot of science out right now just showing this idea of essentially moral incongruence as being the number one cause of all of the distress that comes from watching porn. Meaning, that it's not necessarily how much porn you're watching, but just the enormous amount of shame and stigma that we heap onto people for watching porn. The whole idea that porn is addictive has been completely debunked. There's a very famous paper out by Dr. Nicole Praz called The Emperor Has No Clothes, or a review of the porn addiction model, really showing that, when we look at something like, drugs or alcohol, our definition of addiction is that you need more and more and more of the substance in order to get the same high. We don't find that with porn. And I don't want to say that there aren't some people who, of course, can develop problems and compulsive use, right? But first of all, compulsive use is not addiction, right? It's a compulsion. It's, if anything, more similar to something like, OCD. But it usually is fueled out of a sense of emotional avoidance, right? In other words, what the data tells us is that motivation matters so much, right? If somebody's coming to porn and they're just looking for fantasy and for it to be pleasurable and fun, and it's sort of taboo and titillating, that, that's not usually going to lead to any kinds of problems. It's really when somebody is experiencing some underlying level of depression or anxiety, and because they don't really have access through society to tools to be able to express their feelings. We see this especially with young men, and we have a loneliness epidemic happening. They don't really know how else to cope with those negative feelings. And so, yes, sure, they do turn to porn, and which can provide a quick feeling of excitement and relief. And then those feelings inevitably surface back and crush down upon them again. And so I think that we just get to kind of a dangerous place where we're really allowing these laws to be written more by some sort of internal puritanical idea that watching sex or sex in general is evil, rather than really trying to create legislation that helps people's mental well-being.
Professor Nicole McNichols teaches a very popular University of Washington class called The Diversity of Human Sexuality. She has a new book coming out this week. It's called You Could Be Having Better Sex, The Definitive Guide to a Happier, Healthier, and Hotter Sex Life. And we're going to be talking with you about the book, I hope soon, in the near future. You can also see her speaking at Town Hall, talking about the book this Friday. We're going to share more information in the show notes for this episode. Nicole McNichols, congratulations on the book, and thank you very much for chatting with me.
Thank you, Libby. This was such a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.